Welcome to Mission Majjhima. Ajahn. Ajahn, so tell us about the Cūḻadhammasamādāna Sutta, the shorter discourse in the way of undertaking things.
In this and the next one, we both find the Buddha says there are 4 ways of undertaking things, and he's pointing to a distinction between what is felt now and what is felt in the future. And so the first way of undertaking things is what is felt as pleasant now, but which ripens in the future as pain. Second way of undertaking things is what is painful now and ripens in the future as more pain. The third way is ways of undertaking things which are painful now but ripen in the future as pleasure. And the fourth way of undertaking things is acting in a way which is pleasant now and ripens in the future as pleasure. So that first way of undertaking things is mostly the way that most people, probably through most times and places in history, relate to the world, is in a way that there is perceiving that there is no drawback in sensual pleasures. So this is the way of undertaking things which is about sensual gratification now, without any thought about what the future consequences of that might be. So that's the first way of undertaking things. The second way of undertaking things is the path of an ascetic who lives a life which, without much thought, just thinks that the way of asceticism, and the Buddha gives this stock list of ascetic practices, excessive fasting, or belief that simply by experiencing painful things right now, that'll lead to rebirth in heaven. But if one comes through it with the wrong view, then actually it'll lead to hell or lead in a downward trajectory. The third way of undertaking things is one who has excessive or strong greed, anger, and delusion just by nature. So one is of strong greed, anger, and delusion when they're trying to live a holy life, or they're trying to live a way which is morally blameless. It's hard for them because we've got strong greed, anger, and delusion. So they lead a holy life, or they lead a life of purity in a way which is painful now, but which will lead to rebirth in a good direction, lead to heaven. It leads upward. You're training the mind in good things. And the fourth way is one is not of strong or excessive greed, anger, and delusion, and they experience pleasure now, i.e. they can attain the jhanas right now, and then based on that good conduct, that pleasant conduct, the jhanas, they experience rebirth in heaven. So the Buddha commends the latter 2 ways of undertaking things, regardless of whether or not one's present experience is pleasurable or painful, pleasant or unpleasant. You still do the right thing because the long-term fruit of that is pleasant. And then in addition to being pleasant, it also, if one's acting in ways which are moral, leads to nibbana if one interacts with it in the right way. Tell us, what did you find interesting about this sutta?
Just that simile of the Malava creeper I love. I mean, first, I think there's important to contextualize, this was teaching given to a bunch of celibate monastic men in this case. We don't have as many of the Buddhist teachings that were given to the Bhikkhuni order, but I'm sure there's an equivalent, admonitions and encouragements. So, I think it's important to say this isn't saying there's something wrong with women or anything like that in terms of the touch of a woman's arm. But that image of how sensual desire and kind of our giving into our addictions first just touches us with that downy tendril. And it just seems so innocuous. Like, what does it matter just to have this much of whatever the addiction is? And then the Buddha pointing out that that's the beginning point of something that can be much more kind of strangling to a life. And I think I just love that image, and how our kind of bias can just keep dismissing the effects we might see because we want so badly whatever it is we want. And there's another interesting sutta where the Buddha really points out the ethical weight of particularly someone undertaking a holy life and what obligation we're under to really pay attention to giving up sensual desires that do not serve us, or sensual desires in general. And he actually, there's a really beautiful discourse where he speaks about he says, alms gathering is the lowest form of livelihood, but people, practitioners intent on escaping birth, aging, and death undertake it for the sake of escaping birth, aging, and death. And, therefore it's rightly undertaken. But if one undertakes this livelihood but still engages in sensual desires, it's like a log from a funeral pyre smeared with excrement. Not good for anything. You can't build with it, but it's also, it's not useful for burning. It's kind of the lowest form. So just saying, like, if you've undertaken this life, renunciants, then you're under an increased level of kind of obligation to really pay attention to sensual desire and giving it up. It has an ethical import that's even greater. So I think that's a kind of very impactful simile as well. And the final thing is, I think that the painful now ripening in future pain can seem very distant to many of us. I mean, not many of us are, undertaking these practices of standing or whatever it is. I think it's important to keep an eye out for that same flavor on our own practice, just on a little by little basis. Like, I find many people, they find these teachings and they really pour themselves into it, but by renouncing more and more. And there's just there can be a violence to it, which isn't helpful. And so I think an important ethos for moderns in terms of practice is like flourishing normalcy and warmth, and just to notice when we're falling into that category, even in a more subtle way. What about you, Ajahn? What else would you draw out of this?
I just briefly did a brainstorming session to name this first type of bias, which is pleasant now, but in the future leads to pain, just because it's basically the waters most of us swim in as humans, that thinking that there's no harm in sensual indulgence. So some of the names that we came up for this secular axiom of innocent enjoyment, the unquestioned sensual optimism, assumed benignity of pleasure, default hedonic trust, naive indulgence ethos, or default positive valuation of sensuality. And it's good to think and come up with names for, this is not what most a liberal modern view, progressive view of the world doesn't necessarily put their finger so clearly that there really is, over time, a very clear liability, a danger in blindly following, just taking all of one's enjoyment and life worth into finding just joy in pleasure. And Ajahn, anything else you'd like to draw out?
Maybe just one brief moment, as I find it very heartening, just where the Buddha speaks about practice that is painful now but ripens in future pleasure, where despite all of our defilements and flaws and the strength of our greed, hatred, and delusion, you keep on practicing, and eventually, there's a really good result from that. And I just wanted to illustrate it with one verse from the Therigatha, the verses of the elder nuns, where it really humanizes the path. So it's Siha. Due to irrational application of mind, I was racked by desire for pleasures of the senses. I was restless in the past, lacking control over my mind. Overcome by corruptions, pursuing perceptions of the beautiful, I gained no peace of mind under the sway of lustful thoughts. Thin, pale, and wan, for 7 years I wandered full of pain, finding no happiness by day or night. Taking a rope, I entered deep into the forest, thinking it's better that I hang myself than I return to the lesser life. I made a strong noose and tied it to the branch of a tree. Casting it around my neck, my mind was freed. So this person driven to the brink of despair, and then in that, but she finds liberation in the end. There's a moment where her mind is freed. And I just find that very, we're not the only ones who struggle with this path. So Ajahn, what's the word of the week?
The word of the week is vipaka. Vipaka, which means result. It's the aspect of karma, which is the result, what we will experience in the future. So,
well, we hope to see some of you on Zoom in a few minutes, and otherwise we'll see you next week for Majjhima Nikaya 46. Ajahn.